Thank you. Like some of our other speakers today, I am new to general semantics, so I really appreciate you having me here so I can work my ideas out with you today. As a kid, I remember watching the 1960s film version of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine with my dad and debating the possibility of time travel. I read the novel and was inspired by the words of the time traveler because he believed that people in the future would be so far advanced in front of us, but he quickly determines that the opposite is true. The Eloi and the Morlock live without current technology and knowledge. They lack discernible language skills and a connection to the physical objects that the traveler finds there. It is as if these items were abandoned by an extinct race of beings that valued the preservation of knowledge in a way the Eloi and Morlocks did not. The traveler finds little familiar to him there, and the few relics that remain are meaningless to the inhabitants of this world. As I look back at the narrative with adult eyes, I wonder, with all that humanity built in my lifetime and before, how did we lose it? Korzybski's work in general semantics gave me an entrance into this conversation. In Science and Sanity, he states that humans are unique in the animal world because they time bind to pass information to the next generation who builds upon it. So I ask, is it possible to interrupt time binding? And if so, how and to what effect? We rely so much on technology to preserve knowledge that one could postulate its loss. Before fixing a faucet, we no longer call our fathers or grandfathers to teach us. We turn to YouTube and watch a stranger do it, and then emulate what we saw without internalizing it to really learn it. If we need it again, we Google it. People no longer memorize information they can find on demand. Google becomes a McLuhan-esque extension of the human brain where one offloads knowledge of math, science, and great literature to make room for more important things like the latest Kardashian exploits or the names of Taylor Swift's ex-boyfriends. No matter the cause, if time binding does not occur, parts of the human narrative will be lost. While The Time Machine is the work that inspired these questions for me, it's not the only text where this is considered. Authors of science and speculative fiction may offer answers to 21st century scholars like me. What I will discuss here is the premise of a larger work where I examine sci-fi and speculative fiction through the lens of Korzybski's work in general semantics to evaluate the predictions the authors make about a future without time binding. I'll limit today's discussion to The Time Machine and Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake as I give an overview of how these authors explore the concept. In The Time Machine, Wells shows what happens in a future where time binding ceases because traditional communication is lost. Readers meet the time traveler at dinner with friends while he reveals his invention and discusses what he learned about the fate of humanity from his travels to the future. He explains the world ends what T.S. Eliot later suspected, not with a bang, but a whimper, when the ceasing rotation of the planet and dimming of the aged sun combine to create a frozen, silent, and barren planet millions of years in the future. Although he visits multiple time periods, the traveler shares an extended narrative about his experiences in the year 802,701. He attempts communication with its inhabitants, who were barely reminiscent of the humans from his own time. He describes the Eloi as a race of people resigned to a life of complacency, who engage only in pleasurable ease. They lack communication skills and advanced technology and are physically small. Their counterparts and Morlocks also lack communication skills, but are physically stronger than the Eloi. They have some factory-like technology underground, although what they produce is left to the imagination. The traveler shares his interactions with the Eloi and Morlock as he attempts to get his machine back to escape before he suffers the same fate as the Eloi. There is a definite lack of time binding as the future progresses, which the traveler notes when he says both races have forgotten their high ancestry. He discovers the Palace of Green Porcelain, which is clearly a defunct museum, full of relics covered in dust and disarray. Some of the items were preserved perfectly and could be useful, but the lack of communication from prior generations left them worthless to the Eloi and Morlocks. The traveler says, I grieved to think how brief the dream of the human intellect had been. It had committed suicide. It had set itself steadfastly towards comfort and ease. It had attained its hopes to come to this at last. The recording and sharing of history necessary for time binding cannot occur in this inarticulate society. The traveler refers to the future periods he visits as increasingly quiet. At first, they lack the traditional sounds of language the traveler knows, but as he goes further into the future, he notes that it is devoid of virtually all sound. He discusses this in relationship to the Eloi and Morlocks who use simplistic grunts and coos to sparsely communicate, then revisits it again when he goes millions of years into the future. He notes, beyond these lifeless sounds, the world was silent. Silent. All the sounds of man, the stir that makes the background of our lives, all that was over. He explicitly ties sound to the existence of life and indicates that without at least some noise that enables communication, no matter how rudimentary, life does not exist. He implies that when technology eliminates work and allows for nothing but fun, man enters periods of increasing quiet. The loss of collective narratives that foster the sharing of information sever humanity's ability to time bind and increasingly stifle progress. Each generation must now begin not where their forefathers left off, but anew, losing all progress, which in this case is never recovered. Wells asks the reader to question what the future may hold if we continue along the current path of capitalism and consumerism, driven by the continued creation of technology that makes us more complacent. As we continue to amuse ourselves to death, as Postman would say, we give up opportunities for time binding, which require both consistent language and hard work. If humans continue to offload work to technology, they may embrace the pleasurable, ignore the work necessary for continued growth, and interrupt the time binding process that prevents the devolution that Wells presented in his novel. In the preface to the third edition of Science and Sanity, Korzybski says, "We need not blind ourselves with the old dogma that human nature cannot be changed, for we find that it can be changed. Although the implication is that change is positive, in this novel, Wells begs the question, what if it isn't?" A second work that is part of this discussion is Atwood's Oryx and Crake, where she demonstrates how time binding can be destroyed intentionally to eliminate human knowledge. Set in a post-apocalyptic time around 2050, the novel follows Snowman, one of the last unaltered humans to survive a plague engineered by his genetic genius friend Crake. Crake engineers the plague, installs it as a pill, in a pill, and uses Snowman to sell this pill to the unsuspecting masses as the fountain of youth. Snowman is unaware that the pill contains a deadly virus that will cause a mass extinction event. With humanity obliterated, Crake's paradise project of genetically altered humans he calls Crakers become the replacements. Crake engineered them to eliminate what he felt were destructive characteristics so that he could rewrite the narrative and create humanity 2.0. He denies them knowledge of the outside world, sending his partner Oryx to teach them only what is necessary for life outside their compound. Crake's project links loosely here to Korzybski's idea that with a re-educated, educated class, the world would soon become a different place to live. But instead of re-educating an educated populace, Crake eliminates it to start with a clean slate. Atwood provides a playbook detailing how time binding can be interrupted using technology. Once interrupted, new voices enter the discussion, controlling and rewriting the narrative on their own terms. The reader is left to ponder whether this is a loss for the technologically advanced mankind or a benefit that could enable a fresh start for a broken humanity feeling the impacts of climate change, corporate greed, poverty, and illness. So how can time binding be interrupted? Crake tells Snowman, all it takes is the elimination of one generation. Break the link in time between one generation and the next, and it's game over forever. Atwood uses the words link in time here in a clear reference to time binding. Crake believes that changing the world requires a complete destruction and rewrite of the human story, for which he provides a roadmap. First, destroy the arts. They have largely been removed from schools anyway in favor of STEM-based activities that build skills that enable progress for profit. So Craik simply builds on this. Second, eliminate the written record just in case there's someone left who can read it. Technology affords the ability to offload all knowledge that is not necessary for daily survival. And as Lance writes on the binding biases of time, humans who lack information storage outside of their memory will practice economy in their time binding and only pass on what is needed for survival. Craik counts on this here. Third, physical structures must fall into ruin and disrepair, so architecture cannot be passed on. And finally, destroy language to prohibit the transfer of any knowledge that is left. Once the cultural narrative is destroyed, Craik erroneously believes that he can genetically remove negative behaviors like greed, jealousy, anger, and hate from the Craikers. If he eliminates the culture that nurtured them, he can use technology to breed out the biological inclinations that fostered these behaviors. Considering Craik's forethought on this, readers are left to wonder if he achieves his goal. But Atwood gives us hope that Craik was only temporarily successful. And over time, the Craikers will use their innate desire for knowledge to restart the process of time binding to make progress themselves. There are hints in the novel throughout that the Craikers may be entering the stage of semantic infancy Korzybski describes when they engage with Snowman in their new environment. By the end of the novel, readers see that these traits have begun to reemerge through the Craikers' dialogue with Snowman. In Manhood of Humanity, Korzybski states, evolution is the only theory which is in harmony with the facts and with all branches of science. Life is dynamic, not static. Craik believed he could engage in the act of creation, wielding genetic power like a god to remake humans into what he felt was a better form. But he ignored the fact that humans are not static. They are dynamic beings who continuously evolve to survive and grow in their environments. His success was temporary because he believed the Craikers would not evolve. Perhaps he should have listened to Korzybski. If the elimination of one generation can interrupt time binding, perhaps one generation can begin its rebuild. Korzybski says time binding is something humans possess inherently, so Craik could not remove it through genetic engineering. The Craikers evolve like those before them and begin the process again. Atwood suggests technology can interrupt time binding, but not remove it because the human urge to pass on knowledge is too strong. Despite Craik's efforts, this desire humans possess to share their knowledge will continue regardless of interference. These two authors and others may offer us an entrance into what the future would look like if time binding were interrupted, and suggestions as to how we can protect the process as well. While Wells presents a future where a lack of time binding and communication lead to the downfall of humanity, Atwood is a little more optimistic. She shows that just because an older narrative was lost does not mean it cannot be recovered or a new one be developed. So why consider this now? The development of countless new technologies is changing how we share and save information. Individuals like Craik misuse technology in ways that disrupt time binding, spreading fake news and misinformation, which enables the powerful to change narratives to suit them, instead of sharing knowledge that allows future generations to progress from our generation's work. Perhaps more importantly, these technologies in a way silence us, like Wells describes. Instead of engaging in face-to-face conversations in real time, we communicate with others while alone. Humanity becomes more and more quiet, replacing the sounds of conversation with clacking keys and beeping notifications. These authors remind us that now is the time to revisit these ideas through the eyes of Korzybski and general semantics, to protect the sounds of this generation so the next generation may hear them. Thank you.